foremost, can I thank everyone so much for jumping in, donating your time, and spending a little bit of time talking about this pivotal transformational journey that Xero has gone through over the last couple of years. My name is Dan Pooley, and I'm very privileged to be able to hold the position of Head of Customer Success at Checkbox. And with me, I have Georgia Petrie. Georgia has coming up to 6 years of experience with Xero as legal counsel. And Georgia, I might throw over to you just to give a little bit of an introduction before we dive into the meat of what we're going to be talking about today.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. And hi, everyone. So excited that you could all join us today. Really looking forward to the session. So I'm Georgia. I'm based in Wellington. And like Dan said, I've been with Xero a little over 5 years now. Initially, I was in the company secretariat division of the legal team, and I'm now in the commercial function as legal counsel. Yeah, thanks.
Very good, very, very good. And I guess a little bit about my background. Been with Checkbox coming up to, in a couple of months, a year now, which is kind of exciting, and have the great privilege of spending the last decade or so with companies in all sorts of different startup and growth phases, with a real penchant towards operations. So know firsthand how pivotal a on-point legal team can be. So this is actually quite exciting for me. Jumping into the overview of today's session, what we're going to be talking about, first and foremost, some of the key drivers of Xero's document automation journey, including the decision-making process and addressing initial uncertainties. We're going to be unpacking that in kind of a why, what, or rather the who, and then the how of this journey process, and getting some of George's expertise. As we all know, Xero, a bit of a darling in the tech-forward automation space with regards to cloud computing. So it's going to be interesting to get some advice and some information from a bit of an expert in the field in this area. Towards the end of the session, we're going to be going into some major pitfalls and some other bits and pieces to do with the journey, some considerations. And what I'd love to do for anyone on the session is for you all, as you're listening, to shoot your questions in. If there's anything you'd like to go deeper on, or there's anything that you've heard about and you'd like to continue sort of probing around, please shoot those questions into the chat, because we'd love to keep this as informal and as organic as possible. Towards the end of the session, for anyone who wants to hang on towards the end, we're going to be opening up a poll and giving everyone in this session the opportunity to continue the conversation with us as well. So keep your eyes on that poll. It'll be a single click, and then you can get one-on-one sessions and break-offs with members of the Checkbox team to continue the conversation. All right. So, Georgia, what do you think? Should we jump in?
Very excited. Let's go.
Very good. Very, very good. So just to set the scene, let's talk a little bit about your role at Xero and what some of your main responsibilities are. I really want to get a bit of a picture of where some of what we're going to be talking about towards the middle and end of this webinar, where that's coming from in terms of optics and perspective on the legal sphere that is Xero Legal.
Yeah, so my role at Xero, like I mentioned, I'm now in the commercial function. And so obviously the majority of my role is really business partnering, so supporting the business in various regions on different agreements, on different projects that they're working on. I also personally have a great interest in automation and process development. So I've been a lead member or just a member of a number of automation and process improvement projects that we've done within the legal team at Xero. I'm currently the legal owner of the Checkbox tool, and we can talk a bit more about how we've used Checkbox at Xero and how that's helped with our automation journey. So I also work ongoingly with Checkbox to help manage that tool and create improvements and updates as we go. So yeah, a huge part is business partnering and working with different stakeholders in different regions and different areas of the globe, but also identifying ways that we can improve processes and create efficiencies within the team and for our business partnering support models.
Beautiful. No, thank you. Thank you for that. I guess to get a little bit deeper, on the specific side, what does your sort of day-to-day or maybe month-to-month involvement look like with Checkbox in particular? So what are some of your responsibilities and how do you place it and manage it, I suppose, in conjunction with everything else that you have on your plate?
Yeah, so I think that question about managing it is interesting, and that's definitely something we're going to get to later on in terms of ongoing maintenance and updates and improvements to processes that do save a lot of time and create efficiencies and automation in some cases. And so at the moment, I meet monthly with a member of the Checkbox team who I work with as our case manager. And we just connect, see what updates are possible. I gather feedback from the business if there's any, small issues or updates that need to be made. Or, we're also looking at proactive things of how could we make this tool even better? What other areas could we apply this to? What other pieces of work could we potentially automate? So it's both that reactive problem solving as well as looking at options going forward and how to more broadly apply this tool. So we work together quite regularly, and I'm also working with the business both on a day-to-day basis, obviously on a lot of legal work, but also on proactive projects such as this, and connecting with the business, asking for feedback, having calls, talking to them about how they use, for example, this tool, if there's any things that if there's any ways that they could see it being improved or modified so it even better is more fit for purpose.
Amazing. Some really, really juicy foreshadowing in there to some of our talk track topics today. I'm particularly excited to unpack the important versus urgent collision of responsibilities, because it's one that gets a whole bunch of different work functions, not just legal, but it's going to be particularly interesting with regards to that continual improvement journey that we'll talk about in a little bit of time. So in that case, that sets a really nice sort of framework and scaffold from an optics standpoint. Let's start at the very beginning and talk a little bit about the why of legal automation. So the importance of innovation, of process improvement, and of implementing technology for Xero, particularly considering that Xero is such a progressive tech company. So at a why level, let's look at the journey. Like, what was the consideration? Why is this important? And then how does Xero double down on some of that almost core DNA?
Yeah, and so I think the answer to that is really twofold. So one, like you've touched on, the context of working in a technology company does lean itself to, making a prioritizing and, acknowledging the importance of automation and leveraging technology tools in order to improve processes and efficiencies and work better across teams. So I think that's really helpful. And it also means that both the lawyers and a lot of our business partners are very used to using a lot of different technology tools in their day-to-day work. And so that it's easier to get people on board with a new tool or a new process. I would also say in the context of our legal team, so we've got a little over 50 lawyers located globally, and we're split into various divisions. So that's, company secretariat, intellectual property, commercial, and within that, some of those teams are split even another layer down into regional groups. So that means that we work collaboratively across a lot of different sub-teams, working with people, in a different area of the country, in a different country altogether. Plus our business partners and our stakeholders are often spread out across the globe. So we're working virtually across a lot of different time zones, with trying to keep lines of communication open, and also ensure that, we're not falling into silos and we're working in the most effective and consistent manner. So I think the two of those things combined mean it's really important for us to consistently and continuously identify ways that we can automate or improve particular processes and look for efficiencies, just because it's so easy within a big team that's really spread out to fall into, say, those silos and a particular way of working, and not be having that communication and that consistency spread across the teams. And I would say, like I said, we touched on the fact that the business is really used to using different technologies. We also work following some Agile methodologies within the legal team. So we're quite set up in a way that we have and I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with Agile methodologies, quite a buzzword in these last few years. But we have stand-ups, we have ways of connecting throughout the day to make sure that those communication lines are open, and that's a really great way as well that we can identify areas that we could improve, or say that automation could be employed in.
That is really, really cool. I think, I mean, for anyone on the call who doesn't know what Xero is, maybe we'll give like a nutshell on sort of like what the company is, what the product is. Although I'm not sure anyone on the call won't know what it is. But it's interesting to look at the Agile methodology componentry that you've just spoken about and how that might translate into non-conventionally Agile teams. And it's really, really interesting. I actually use some of the startup methodology, some of the Agile methodology stand-ups and retros and bits and pieces for a long while now. And I find them invaluable even outside of that development and that product space. So talk me through like a stand-up in legal. What might that look like? And how do you get to the crux of some of those rituals?
Yeah, so a stand-up in legal, and I mean, it differs. We don't employ, prescriptive Agile methodologies across the full team. So teams have discretion to, find out what works for them. But a stand-up might look like we come on, we're using a Kanban board in order to track our work. We're talking about what we have on for the day. We're talking about any blockers. We're talking about if people can, help with work or if we have extra capacity to take things on. So it's really, being flexible in how we're allocating work, how we're organizing our day. And that also helps, that kind of level of communication really helps to identify, someone else has worked on this recently, or someone else has been following a different way of working for that particular project. So doing that every day really helps to keep the lines of communication open when you're not all together meeting in an office, which I'm sure not many people are these days, given the current environment. So.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think that's really interesting, and I suppose points to towards some of Xero's prowess as a bit of a forward-thinking company. So taking that foundation and how you guys are operating, why is automation and that improvement process then core to this discussion? Why automation?
Yeah, so I think that the nature of being spread out across a number of areas and across different teams, and the ability, like I mentioned, to get into a silo or really be stuck in the weeds on something. I think automation is such a key to unlocking so many efficiencies. I mean, if the business, for example, doesn't need to contact legal for an entire piece of work, thinking about how much time that takes off of our plate, even if it's just routine, repetitive, kind of an easy piece of work that we're taking a look at. So I think really like taking a step back and looking at the work we're doing as a whole team or as a whole sub team, or more broadly as an entire team. And looking at those areas of repetition, looking at those areas of maybe potential slight inefficiencies or ways that we could improve. I think that automation is such a key driver or a key result in being able to achieve a lot of those efficiencies. Sometimes you think, oh, wouldn't it be great if we didn't have to do this piece of work? And then often automation can be the key to, yes, it would be great and it's possible just for that to happen. So
yeah, that's really,
important.
really interesting. My next question on that, I suppose, is why is it important for legal professionals to learn about automation, to understand the tooling and to get their teeth in? And I think you answered some of that already. That penchant towards being able to see an opportunity to solve a problem and to be able to do it yourself is kind of interesting. So yeah, talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, totally. I would say the key word that I would use here would be like the empowerment that you can get from both knowing about automation and employing an automation tool, getting up to speed on a new piece of technology. I think that there obviously is always a cost up front, whether that's monetary or time, getting buy-in from the business. There's always going to be those upfront kind of costs, but really taking that bird's eye view of stepping back and looking at how can we better support the business? How can we be a better business partner? Create a more efficient process, more consistently support the business so they're getting a consistent result no matter what lawyer they talk to in what area of the world. And also empowering you to really take time back. If you're creating an automation process, that means that 10 contracts a month don't come across your desk. Well, then that's, say, however many hours a month that, you can then direct your time to a different project or, maybe slightly more complex pieces of work. So I would really say that the reduction in repetitive work for a lawyer, but then also the end result and that kind of experience for the business user means it's like just super empowering to be able to, know about these tools and be able to drive a project and implement a tool like this.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And that word empowerment rings really, really true, I think, with a lot of what we'll be talking about today. What does it mean specifically for the Xero team in terms of that empowerment journey and setting aside time, resources? Like, how does that prioritization matrix work for you guys specifically?
Yeah, so I think that's tricky in every team, no matter how, technologically advanced you may be, and no matter how, excited about new technology tools the team or the broader business might be. It is really hard to always prioritize proactive projects, just because of that upfront time and potentially cost when you're getting urgent work requests for the business. It's really hard to change for that mindset of, oh, well, I have an urgent work request, but sorry, I can't look at this because I'm thinking about a potential automation project that we might be able to deploy and make a process better. So balancing that is really difficult, and I think it's difficult for all teams, particularly teams that maybe don't have any existing automation processes, or maybe the business hasn't really contemplated that before. So I think, and as a result, when you get busy, it's the first thing that falls off your list of, oh, that's a nice to have project that I'm working on in my spare time. But I think, for all the reasons we've just touched upon about, why automation is so important, and really the benefits that you do get from that upfront work and implementing a process, it's almost a shift in thinking of, this isn't a nice to have, this is a key result that I'm going to deliver on this date. So whether that's, incorporated into your legal team goals, your legal team, key results, your personal success metrics for your year. And it becomes a really concrete goal of not just a hobby project that I'm working on the side to, this is one of my goal deliverables or the team's deliverables that we've committed to delivering at a certain point. So I think it's so important to shift a project like this into that kind of way of thinking, because otherwise it just falls off every week when things get busy and you're going to do it during a quiet period that never seems to come. So there's different elements that I think help with that, whether it's getting a sponsor at a certain level to get behind the project and to help drive those goals, or whether it's having top-down influence of different people in support, so you really have support to prioritize this above maybe something that's not as urgent, that's a request from the business. I think all of that really helps with the mindset shift of a nice to have versus a key deliverable and something that will get done.
That is really, really interesting. I think for me, bringing innovation and continual improvement into the core of a team's output, like putting key results around it, or making it, as you mentioned, part of yearly goals and things like that, is really important to actually drive that innovation and that improvement. Otherwise, as I think we're both very well aware, and I think most people on this call, please shoot it into the chat if you have seen this, are very well aware, the important and the urgent and day-to-day tend to take over and push those side projects out to a point where they often don't get done. All right, before we jump in, I think that's a really nice segue point for us to ask any of the viewers if they have any questions, just to throw them in the chat of anything that we've just talked over. We're not going to answer them now. We're going to come back to them at the end, but just wanted to make sure that if anything from this section is fresh in your mind, please throw it into the chat. We'd love to hear from everyone who's listening live. And next on up, we've talked a little bit about the why of legal automation and what are some of the drivers and some of the reasons for this being an important component of the legal DNA. Next is the what or the who of automation. The key points of significant ROIs, business groups that were involved, considerations when implementing these sorts of things. So we're going to get that level deeper and look at some of the more operational nuts and bolts, I suppose. So Georgia, what were some of the key factors of this automation journey for you guys? The what and the who?
Yeah, so I think before even thinking about key factors, it was identifying an area that we could automate. So I'll just chat quickly about the actual our automation project in particular. So at Xero, we've automated our NDA process with Checkbox, and I think we're going to do a demo of that later on. But this means that the business is able to self-serve. They're able to go on a tool within their tool dashboard, put in the Xero details, put in the counterparty details, generate a Xero mutual NDA, and send it out to signature. That doesn't touch legal's desk whatsoever. So that was the end result. So looking back at, how do we identify this? So we saw that NDAs were coming across our desk, and it was a really large chunk of repetitive work that we were doing. Often it, there was only small changes needed, or the business only needed a small amount of assistance, but we were continuously, it always takes time out. You have to work out who's going to pick it up. You have to connect with the business. You have to prepare your responses. So that was actually taking quite a significant time out of our lawyers day to day. And we looked at, okay, if we're acting as also, somewhat of a bottleneck in this process, so the business is, ready to get engaged and chatting to a third party, they have to send a legal request through, they have to wait for our comments, we might have to get in touch with them and have a chat. All of that takes time out of everyone's workday and slows the process down. So what we have since done with Checkbox is create a tool that means the business can self-serve, and legal is not needed for that particular process. So I think identifying that really repetitive piece of work that was able to be easily automated, it was there were low requirements for the amendments that we would need each time. It was very easy for us just to kind of put some information blocks in that the business could fill out, and then it would be fit for purpose with pretty much any counterparty. So that was how we identified that. And then we thought about the factors. So I think thinking about the end user and what the success metrics look like for the product is really good to start on your automation journey before you look at the tech, before you think about, well, what process could we use? It's okay, well, if we had a process, who would we want it to be benefiting? What would we want the outcome to be? So in our minds, it was, we would want a process whereby the legal team, the hours the legal team is spending on NDAs each week, each month, are significantly, if not totally, reduced. And the business is able to, quickly and effectively reach out to counterparties, and, they're not waiting on the legal team for a response or for an approval. So that was really our end goal. And we found that the business teams are always very excited to hear about a process that means that they can just, do a few clicks and send out a document on their own, and they don't need to come through to legal. So it was easy to get buy-in from the business teams. And I think keeping that metric front of mind enabled us to get buy-in from the broader legal team. So saying, we're getting on average X amount of NDAs a month. As a result, on average, our legal team is spending X hours, a month. If we can implement a tool, we're going to reduce that to 0 or to, by 90% or 80%. So I think having that use case and that kind of success metric at the start really helped when we were considering, who do we need to get on board? Who do we need to get buy-in? And as you can imagine, it was much easier once we had that vision to get people on board and to get people behind that, because, what a great outcome that would be for both us and the business. So I think that was really key in our particular process here. I would also say, so in terms of our ROI for this particular tool, we have seen a little over 250 NDAs, I think last time I checked, come through the tool since we launched in December 2022. So that's 250 NDAs that none of our legal team have had to look at, 250 NDAs that we would have looked at over the last, however many months, having not gone through the tool. So I think obviously that's only a metric that you get once you launch the tool, but that's a real success story for us in terms of that totally aligns with the goals that we had when we first thought about this project. And then I think in terms of, so there's always, I think about considerations in two elements. So I think, who's going to be using it, who needs to be on board, who do we need to get approvals from, and also how are we going to do it? So the how are we going to do it is the technology that we employed. And we really ensured that our end user and our goal drove that technology. So we weren't just going into demos and reaching out to people saying, oh, we want to automate this process. What can we possibly do? We were saying, we want to automate this process with a goal that it's easy to use for the business. It only takes a few clicks. It's pretty low touch for legal. We don't need a technology person or an IT person from our company to be helping us to update the tool. Those were our requirements. So then when we thought about the tech, it automatically, limits that down to providers that match our requirements. And then also when you're talking to providers and reaching out to them, we can also be really clear on what we need and what we don't need.
Amazing. Yeah, I think you've touched on some really interesting points there. The interplay between legal team outcome and ROI of these touchless documents and not having to sort of handhold 250 of these documents through a process, but then also the business stakeholder side of being able to get an instant answer to a problem. So instead of having to wait for this document that would be traditionally a blocker to the next conversation or the forward movement of that particular deal or that particular situation, they can click a couple of buttons, put some details in, boom, it's out for signing with the counterparty, and they have an instant next step, and their process is also now tighter, and they're moving at more velocity because of this innovation as well. So that balance between business stakeholders, legal team stakeholders, and then also some of the tech considerations. So what solutions has IT put in place? Where are things being filed? And all that other tech stack stuff. I think they're three really nice compartmentalized areas to start thinking about the right processes to automate. We've had some really good questions that have come in, Georgia, as well, while you've been talking about that. We'll address them at the end, but around like different solutioning and bits and pieces. Thinking about finding a problem rather than being told which document to automate, I think is a really good way to start the journey as well. Because all different businesses will have different volumes of NDAs and different volumes of different types of documents and bits and pieces. So how do you get the right criteria almost for working out what the good target would be rather than which document? But we'll talk about that a little bit more towards the end of the webinar. So one thing that I wanted to get a little bit more of a Xero specific deep dive in was the process of getting business stakeholder or even stakeholder general buy-in. So you said it gets easier with certain criteria, but what did that look like with Xero? Was there a process? Are there any interesting stories or anecdotes there, or was it all pretty much smooth sailing on the back of your innovation first DNA?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say any automation journey is, or maybe process improvement journey is all smooth sailing, as much as I would love for that to be the case. But yeah, given the context of Xero and the business partners that we do have, it is we're starting off from a level of people being comfortable with new technologies, using new processes. So that was easier to get buy-in, but not to say that it was so important for us to go to the business to ask about what their requirements were and what they were wanting to see. I think it's easy from our perspective to say, oh, well, we would love a document where an automation tool where, like you say, no touch for the legal team, but is that what the business team wants? Are they going to feel supported if that's the kind of process that we implement? So I guess going back to the end user who's going to be using this, those are the teams that we connected with, and we said, we're thinking about this type of tool. This is the result that we want. How does this align with your thinking? And what would you like to see in it? And like I say, luckily, a lot of our business partners are used to technology, so they might have already had some good ideas about things that they would like to see or things that they struggled with. And yeah, I would say that in terms of the buy-in phase, that was the main point. I would say something that we did do, and it speaks a little bit to iteration, but when we first launched the tool, we launched it as a pilot, and we often do that when we do automation or process improvement projects. We'll do a pilot with a smaller group, and we either set up times to meet with that group every 2 weeks to get feedback, solicit feedback on the call live. Or with this tool, we actually made a form field when they were finishing the NDA that asked for feedback, but it was a required form field, so they had to respond in the form. in order to get an NDA. So, I mean, we got a lot of feedback back that said no feedback, love the tool. But, we also got feedback that maybe someone wouldn't have gone to the effort of sending us a message about or getting in contact with us about, but, oh, it would be great if I could download it as a Word doc in step 2, just little things like that that really help to improve the process. And just to refine it even more. I think it's easy to think, oh, well, we haven't heard anything. Or we've gone to the business in the first instance, asked if they'd be happy with this, and they've said yes. So we're kind of walking away and doing our own thing. It's that like constant communication of, and you might have to sometimes get forced feedback, whether you're setting up a time to call someone or you're, forcing feedback through a form in order to really get people's opinions, because otherwise you might not get any info until something breaks and then people aren't happy. So yeah, I would say that feedback loop when first going to the business, that first approaching the business is not the last point that you want to be talking to them about the tool. It's just the first of many conversations and many iterations of moving through the tool.
Yeah, I really like that. I think that's a really interesting addition to outside of what you would consider as a normal process flow. So you map out this NDA flow, you need to put your details in, you get your document, you send it to your counterparty, off you go. But actually garnering feedback towards the end of the process and getting that touch point with business users who are using the tool, forcing that in, and then using that to continue the innovation journey, I think is interesting, really, really interesting. The point that you made around getting feedback that you wouldn't ordinarily even hear, I think is really useful. At the end of the day, without feedback, often innovation tends to be a little directionless. So that's super, super interesting. It also points to the idea of a process like this. Take automation out of the equation for a moment. These requests are coming in, the legal team's preparing these documents, sending them out, and you're losing the ability to consistently deliver and then level up on that process with a whole bunch of reporting. So you're not seeing like the average time on a desk, you're not seeing how like the average time of a review. So you're losing some of these almost data touch points that you get when you start to build automation into a process. And then those data touch points become really great business stakeholder ROI points as well. Like 5 seconds to get an NDA document sounds pretty cool. That sort of a thing. That is great, Georgia. Thank you for that. Next to jump in on, we talked a little bit about how the document automation side of things fits within some technologies within Xero, but how does it actually gel in with the wider tech stack in terms of other tools that you're using and how you look at like filing documents and what else other business stakeholders are using across Xero?
Yeah, so I would say our tech stack is quite diverse, and it includes a lot of technology tools. Pretty much every tool we connected in via a single platform, but then every tool connects off of that, and they don't all talk to each other all the time. So that's always a big consideration for thinking about new technologies, thinking about new tools is what are people already using, what if there are any requirements for it to connect in with a certain tool such as document management, or that the business uses, that's really important. In terms of Checkbox, we have all of our documents saved within the Checkbox platform, and business users can also pull it and save it within their own contract management platform. So we don't have a need for it to connect in with other tools that we're using. And that just wasn't a requirement for us because we were happy for it to sit as an automation platform that the business uses, and it's linked out through the business, the procurement platform and other business stakeholders platform that they use. So that just wasn't really a requirement when we were preparing our list of requirements and looking at our tech stack.
Yeah, no, sounds really good. I suppose it's one of those future innovation considerations. Now that we've got here and we've got this process in and general acceptance across business stakeholders is good, what's next? What makes this even better or even more automated or even more smart, even more time saving or even better outcomes for business stakeholders, business units, legal team? Very
Definitely.
cool.
And I think that's what's exciting is, thinking about thinking about automation or automating, a huge amount of documents that the legal team looks at is daunting, but thinking about one document or one process that you can automate, and then having a tool that that from there you can create more automation tools, you can do more documents, you can expand, and once the business is already using it and once the team's already using it, you can build from there. So that's really exciting to do a project that only looks at one process, but then know that our options and possibilities going forward are really exciting.
Awesome. Yeah, absolutely. And all that excitement requires some semblance of measurement. So how do you measure the success of these things? How are you guys measuring the success of what you've already done? Is there anything that you change or do differently? And what about future considerations? How would you measure success? How would you go about unpacking what success looks like and how you can actually put a tape to it?
Yeah, and I think success, like I said, thinking about success and, measuring success and what those metrics would look like is so important at the start of your journey. Even if, you can't be clear on specific metrics, but just, what would success look like if this was implemented, in a way that worked super successfully for both the legal team and the business, how would that look? And so I think that both builds the use case in terms of getting buy-in, in terms of getting people on board, but it also creates credibility once the tool is in place, because then you're reporting back on, hey, we told you we were going to implement this tool and it was going to save this much time. Now we've implemented the tool and we've already seen in the last month 15 NDAs come across the tool. And as we said, those all have haven't gone across the legal team and have saved the legal team on average X amount of time. So I think having those success metrics up front, but then also continuously reporting back on those, it's so important. And I think we'll get to this in a bit, that a process like this or an automation project isn't set and forget. You don't just put the tool in and then walk away and never think or look at it again. It's so important. And especially if this is, honestly, regardless, actually, if this is your first automation project or if you have, 20 automation projects that have already been implemented, really going back to the business and repeatedly measuring against those metrics and saying, we've implemented this, this is how much time it saved us, this is how many NDAs we've seen not touch legal is so important. And I think, like I say, it just builds that credibility of people that did buy into the project are saying, oh yeah, wow, that is, what we hoped for, and that's what we're getting. And then when it comes to the next project or when you want to expand and do another document, it just makes the runway so much easier for people to really get behind. So I think, and with a tool like this, with NDAs, the metrics are very easy because they're defined in the tool. I can log in and I can see on any day how many NDAs have gone through, how many people are working on NDAs, and I can even see a breakdown of what area of the company those people are from and that NDA relates to. So we can report down onto that kind of a micro level. And yeah, so I would say that in terms of document automation, the metrics can be quite the metrics can be quite obvious and quite clear. But in terms of other processes, I think you need to really think about how you would define success if you're not going to get those metrics from a tool. If you're the business is going to be using a process, so you're not going to be seeing it. Are you going to reach out to the business every 6 months and say, how many times have you used this tool? How many times has this process worked for you? So you need to be seeking out, defining those metrics and then seeking them out if you're not getting them from a tool. But luckily, Checkbox, it's all in our dashboard, so that's super helpful.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. For those document use cases, it's almost how quickly can we get the document out and in the hands of the right people, marked up and sort of ready to go. And when it comes to things maybe a little bit more intangible, like service requests and service routing, how do we get requests that are coming into the legal team to the right people within a timely manner and get responses back to business stakeholders quickly? Those become a little bit less tangible. Of course, there's a whole bunch of different ways that you can measure those in terms of your first response times and your total case close times and bits and pieces, but there's still things that get that upper level of complexity with regards of shining that ROI back into the business and almost elevating the legal team as that valued business partner to these different business stakeholders. So yeah, I think that's really, really interesting. your segue is beautiful into that next consideration of the common misconception, and we see it a lot on the checkbox side, that once you deploy an app and it's out, it's being used, you wipe your hands and you go into your next project of automation or back to your day job. It doesn't work quite like that. So Georgia, take us through your take on that, which you've been peppering in so far, which is really interesting to see.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that is such a key consideration when thinking about automation. If you're needing to resource, if you're needing to allocate people to work on this project or to run this project, the project doesn't run from the start date until the day you automate, till the day you implement an automation tool. The project is ongoing until you archive the tool or you no longer use that tool. So not to say that you're going to be spending the same amount of time that you've spent up front to manage the tool, but it is really important, because I think just by implementing a tool and then set and forget or walking away, you really run the risk of, one, the tool not updating and iterating in line with the business needs and in line with the legal team needs, but also that people just don't use it. If you're not pushing a tool, if you're not continuously responding to feedback and making changes, the business might just fall out of the habit of using it, and the legal team might not push people towards it because there's a few issues, and then you've done all this upfront work for a tool that's maybe not as effective as it could be. So I think it's really important to keep that in mind when you are thinking about an automation project. Just think about the whole project. So for example, like I mentioned with checkbox, I'm the legal checkbox manager. At the moment, I'm spending maybe an hour a month on checkbox to do process improvements, to meet with the checkbox team. Compare that to how much time we spent up front to employ the project. But it's really important that you are still spending that time and you have people that are responsible for the ongoing maintenance and updates to the project. And also to think about, now that I'm familiar with this tool, I run the tool from the Xero end. How could we use this tool in other areas? I'm in a really great place to identify how a tool like checkbox or another process could be modified and used more broadly or in other areas. So I would say that it can seem a little daunting in that, oh, well, I've done all this upfront work and now I need to keep doing work. It does ebb and flow. You'll want to get feedback rounds and iterate when you first get it off the ground, but then it might be that you don't hear anything for a while and the tool's running smoothly, and then you need to make a few more changes. And I would also just challenge maybe the mindset of, oh, this is just going to be continuous work, to actually, it's a great way to continuously make sure that your processes and your, partnering with the business grows with the business and really continues to help them and continues to benefit the legal team. So it's almost that shift from why do we have to keep continuously doing work, to, wow, what a great way to continuously be getting feedback from the business and to be improving our processes going forward. But it definitely is a consideration that it's not set and forget it, and in order to make it effective and to ensure that it's going to be used by the business and continuously improved, you're going to need people to make time for that.
That's really cool. A couple of really, really juicy points in there. The forced feedback is interesting. Something like checkbox or an automation tool will give you some really great qualitative measures, quantitative measures, but qualitative measures are much more hard to come by.
Okay, cool. So we've got a few questions. So the first one is the point around getting a sponsor to support prioritizing time spent on transformation, and how do you practically do this? So yeah, this one is really difficult, and it's difficult when you don't have that top-down support from a senior leader or a GC to help with that. I think that even getting someone that's maybe a senior leader or someone in the business that's a really important business partner, or someone that's quite a senior in the business, to help with that support. Hey Dan, I'm just answering a quick question. To help with that support, it is really helpful. And I think getting people to see the light can be helped by that really strong use case of how many NDAs are we going to be able to be doing with this tool? How much time is it going to be saving? I know it's difficult to get out of the day-to-day and to get into that proactive world, especially, from a GC who's looking at, wow, my legal team is completely under the pump. How are we going to make time for proactive projects? But it's really looking at, we're under the pump and we're doing this many hours a week on a repetitive piece of work that by putting in work up front would be ideally eliminated down the track. So I think just getting that strong use case and getting sponsors where you can, whether that's from a member of the broader business or sponsors within the legal team, to really help with that use case.
We're pretty much at the end, interestingly enough, of our sort of why, what, how, and then misconceptions flow for our session today. There's been some great questions, George. You've already jumped in and started answering a couple of those. So what we might do is jump into just a quick run through of the NDA tool that we've been talking about today, and then we can jump into some Q&A before we close up. How does that sound, Georgia?
Sounds great.
Good. All right. I'll take us into the app and I'll just run us through the super simple process that you guys have built out for your business stakeholders to create NDAs.
Awesome.
Here we go. So let's have a look at this process. A bit of a welcome page to start with, and Georgia, please jump in and add anything that you'd like as we go on through here. You've got your sort of welcome screen, a couple of bits and pieces guiding your users on how to do things. Obviously, if you come in for your second, your third NDA, you're well versed on what this is looking like. You start on the process and you fill out a few key points of data. Interesting to note here that all of the data here is recorded. So you can start doing some interesting reporting on any of these areas that we're putting in here. So which Xero entity is attracting the highest number of NDAs as an example, but a whole bunch of other interesting things here. And then you pop in your counterparty details. I'm going to throw in just some gobbledygook information here so that we can get things moving. And then the who is signing from Xero section. So really straightforward. The Xero signer of the particular NDA. Whether there is a CC recipient required. I'm not going to put one in for this. And then we go next. We actually end up with some pre-filled information about our NDA. So I'm not going to go through the full NDA here, just the footer where some of the information is shared. But you can see here that the gobbledygook that I added has just been whacked into the footer of this NDA, as well as dispersed anywhere that it is required throughout the document, which is kind of handy. And then our business users can go in and download the document, move on to the next step for completing the process. Georgia, really
they can actually send this out in, oh, sorry, Dan. Yeah, they can, if they click next, this goes out, it links into Adobe Sign. So it sends straight out to the signature that you've put in as the counterparty, and then it will go to the Xero entity signatory for signature in Adobe and then get saved down.
Beautiful. So anything else to add here, Georgia, or any maybe things that have changed in this flow from feedback or anything that you wanted to add?
Yeah, so I think it was really important to us to be super high level and include just a small amount of information. And I guess it kind of touches on a question actually that's come through the Q&A about alternatives to automation and maybe just asking the business to do NDAs on their own. This really ensures that we're really in control of the process. The business is really only able to amend a small amount of information, which is the counterparty details, even down to the Xero entity, those are already pre-filled. And that information just has to be selected from a drop down. So it means that we feel really confident we've got a lot of control over the NDAs. We're totally sure what version is going out to counterparties. There's not been any changes, or we work in Google Docs, so that can lend itself sometimes to changes or versions getting copied and things getting lost. So we really have control over that process, and we can also see all of that reporting within the NDA tool. We can also find all of those NDAs that the business has sent out within the NDA tool. So that's why that in particular is really important for us. And yeah, we have gotten updates from the business. They're really happy with just the two pages. Then they can send an NDA out. It loops in with Adobe Sign. People wanted to be copying in recipients to the NDA. So, say their manager was aware that it had been sent out, as well as the Xero signatory being pinged. So we added that function in. and we've added a few different features that mean a certain field is optional or not optional, just depending on how the business like to use the NDA and what information they prefer to fill in Adobe Sign. And the ability to download and Word at different stages, so the business can take a look at it and then save it to their computer. So yeah, we've made some small iterations from when we first launched, but in terms of the very brief 2-page small amount of information that's needed to then get an NDA out, that was really our goal from the start, and it's what we've got. So we're really happy with that.
Amazing. Yeah, that iterative journey is, I think, really important. What I might do now, actually, before we jump into questions, which we are going to continue into and maybe spend a few minutes over to dive into, I'm going to launch a quick poll for anyone on the webinar today to click on if they'd like to continue the conversation, jump into some breakout spaces, talk with our teams about anything that you want to, or you've heard in this webinar today. We'd love to dive deeper with each and every one of you. So I'll launch that poll up now, and please go in and answer that poll at your leisure as we start running through some of these questions. Georgia, is there anywhere that you wanted to start on the question list?
I think I had to rejoin, so I can only see 2, but I can start with one and I've just answered one, but I can start with one I have seen, which is, do we think automating NDAs has a nudge-on effect of deterring trivial red lines? And I would say yes. In short, it definitely does. The business team saying to their counterparty contact, hey, we can send this NDA through to legal, but here's our MNDA that you can sign right now, and we can send it in Adobe Sign in 10 minutes time. That definitely helps with trivial red lines. We've tried to make our MNDA, obviously, we've automated the tool, so we've tried to make it as appealing as possible to counterparties to avoid back and forth. So that was one of the elements of this project, and it definitely does help with smaller red lines when the business can just say, listen, I can send you this document right now, and we can both sign it, and it's done within the day. So totally.
Perfect. Yeah, I think that makes perfect sense. Also keeping things within, for as much of the situation as possible, within Xero's paper ecosystem, so that it's all incredibly consistent, also helps there as well, for sure. What do we else have here? I see that the checkbox panelist has thrown in a bunch of our questions, which is super useful.
I have seen that one's come through from Jonathan. So systems used for negotiating the NDA. So there's a process, and Dan, you might want to chat to this a little bit, but in checkbox that we haven't employed yet at Xero, but it is an ability to actually redline and to negotiate within the checkbox tool. So beyond, if you get feedback on the MNDA that the business party has sent out, then you can go from there within the checkbox tool, and so the business person and you are across the red lines, and that's all still saved down and captured into the checkbox tool, I believe.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I'm not sure there's anything extra I need to add there. That's perfectly outlined. So essentially an inflow ability to mark up and make changes and red lines based around either party's requirements. Very cool. Any non-NDA examples of document automation? Maybe a bit cheeky, but Georgia, what's next on the horizon for Xero?
What's next? The possibilities are endless, really. I mean, I would say we don't have any examples at the moment. That our NDA tool was, in terms of technical document automation, was the first tool that we've used, outside of different process improvements and automation we've used for other processes. But I would say even down to basic, professional services agreements, down to basic services contracts, there's really an ability to, where you find a piece of repetitive work that you're sending out a very similar agreement each time, or you're reaching a similar agreement, similar positions on the same agreement very often. And, if your business group is advanced enough to be, filling in some of the information themselves beyond just contact details, there's always those opportunities for automation. I think really the sky's the limit when you think about, repetitive work that could be automated.
Yeah, that's absolutely, you hit the nail on the head there. Sales contracts is a common one, SOWs, MSAs, and the list goes on. And contracts or documents with repeatable clausing or minimal changes, absolutely. Even if it comes to the mid-level or more bespoke sort of changes, that redlining feature, which you mentioned, Georgia, allows for some of that to take place within platform, answering Jonathan's question there. Pretty from a tooling standpoint, what I'd love to do actually, Jonathan, if you wanted to dive in a little bit deeper, click the you'd like to continue the conversation in the poll, and we can dive in and we can show you offline some examples of other documents and bits and pieces that are non-NDA versions, and also how the negotiating process happens on the platform.
Cool.
All right. Yeah, well said, Checkbox. Awesome to see you all here. Thank you so much for your time. We're 2 minutes over. So thank you for spending the time diving in. Georgia, in particular, thank you to you for spilling the tea on Xero and automation. It's been an absolute pleasure. We are going to wrap things up. If you haven't, please answer our poll. Otherwise, it's been great to see everyone, and we'll see you all for the next one.
Thanks, Dan. It's been great.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Speak to you all soon.